If you have your Bibles handy, I would encourage you to open again to Exodus chapter 20. We're starting to work through the 10 Commandments, or what have been called in Hebrew the 10 words. And these are central to the identity of God's people, not only in the past, but in the present as well. There's a sign or maybe a little plaque, maybe that's the better thing to call it, in the office, that frankly I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to until last week. This is what it is. And if you can see, it says, all I need today is a little bit of coffee and a whole lot of Jesus. I have to admit that some days I probably feel a little bit of the opposite. What I really need is a whole lot of coffee and a little bit of Jesus, because I mean, after all, Jesus is a pretty big package, and if you get just a little bit of him, you're getting a lot. But coffee, at least for me, there's some days when it seems like you just can't get enough. When I really spotted this, and it's been there kind of all along, but when I really took notice of it earlier in the week, it brought my mind immediately to not the coffee bot, but to the verses that we're going to look at this morning from Exodus chapter 20. And the sign has it right, almost. None of us really needs, I know this is going to be a shock to some of you, none of us really needs coffee. I'm not going to ask for a vote of hands or show of hands on that one. But when it comes right down to it, none of us really needs coffee. I remember reading an article back a ways, and to be honest, I don't know if it was a serious article or if it was a spoof, but it claimed that Jesus probably drank coffee, and that kind of put me at a little ease. So maybe my devotion to it wasn't quite so bad if Jesus drank it. But anyway, none of us really needs coffee at all. But Jesus, that's a whole different thing. That's a whole different thing. My own version of this sign, though, may be closer to where many of us live one way or another than we'd admit or probably even realize. And I'm not alone, I don't think, in sometimes getting it backward. And letting some ordinary thing get in the way of our extraordinary God. It's easy to do, which is why the second commandment that we come to today is so important, the second of these 10 words. And so if you open to Exodus chapter 20, I'm going to read just the first 6 verses for us. The first 3 verses we looked at last week. We're going to look at the next 3 verses 4 to 6, today. Moses writes, "And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." Let's start by asking a pretty basic question, and that is simply this: what is an idol? What is an idol? Verse 4 in the New International Version, which I read, says, "You shall not make for yourself an image." Earlier, I read idol. More current versions of NIV say image. "You shall not make for yourself an image or an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or in the waters below." There's some other versions I think probably capture the original a little better. New American Standard, New Living, for instance. New Living reads, "You must not make for yourself an idol or any kind of an image of anything in the heavens or on the earth or in the sea." There are actually a couple of different words in the original. Doesn't really come through in some translations. one dealing with a physical, like a little statue, the other dealing with some other kind of picture or other kind of representation. And we might wonder, well, why do you need both for? I think some scholars suggest, I think they're right, it's to make it absolutely clear that any form of physical depiction of God is off limits. Absolutely off limits. Now, this little guy here represents the god Baal or Baal, depending on how you want to pronounce it. You might remember his name from the Old Testament. I love the fact that this little guy has an arm missing. I think it says something about just, how great he really is. I mean, he's been dismembered somewhere along the line. Anyway, this little guy is Baal. And figure like this and various other objects, as you know, were used in the ancient Near East, and not just the ancient Near East, but in many parts of the world over many years as part of worship. They were there to represent a god or gods. When we talk about idols, something like this is probably what we often think of. But this morning, I want us to think a little more broadly than that, and to recognize that idols, the idea of idols, is actually something that's more broad, and in some ways maybe even a little more basic or pervasive. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines an idol as an object of extreme devotion. Think about that, an object of extreme devotion. An object could be physical, but it doesn't have to be. Most of us don't have statues of Baal. We don't have statues of some other pagan god sitting around our home someplace. But we have other things that we can become pretty devoted to, don't we? Things that can take on quite a bit of significance for us, extreme significance, and not just coffee. We go a little further now. Think of idolatry this way: as anything that does or even threatens to take God's place in our lives. Think of an idol as anything that does or threatens to take God's place in our lives. And the reality is, an idol could be just about anything. With that definition to work with or work from, let me throw a second question out there. And that is, what do idols do? This is the one we're going to dig down on just a little bit more. And there's more we could say than we have time this morning, but we're going to at least hit some things, hopefully to get a sense of why we need to be careful of them. Now, on the one hand, thinking back to our little friend with the missing arm, we might think that they really don't do anything. In fact, one of the critiques of idols in Scripture is precisely that they don't speak, they don't move, they're utterly dependent on whoever is in control of them. They're dumb. They're dumb and they're powerless. They're deaf, dumb, and powerless. But if we think back to that idea of an idol as something that demands extreme devotion, or something that has the ability to perhaps take God's place in our lives, we need to recognize that idols are actually more powerful than we think, and they are more subtle than we think, or they can be. And oftentimes their power lies in their subtlety. And their power lies in their ability to divert us. Kind of like a train getting off the main track onto a spur or a siding. The real power of an idol sometimes lies in its ability to divert us. I suspect that at least some of us are aware of, unfortunately, what has happened in the last few years around the late Ravi Zacharias and the revelations that have come out about years of misconduct which were hidden during his lifetime but now have come to light. And it's a sad story, and I don't share this to denigrate his memory, but I heard a story not too long ago. A college student who had been with Dr. Zacharias when he was appearing on a college campus a number of years ago, and the student was pretty thrilled to have this opportunity to have a little one-on-one time with Dr. Zacharias before he was going to speak, and he asked him, said, "What advice would you give me at this point in my life?" And the answer was this: beware of even small distractions. Now, whether that was a reflection on his own life and experience or just a general principle, I don't know, but there's a lot of truth in that. Beware of even small compromises. That was what he said. Beware of even small compromises. For our purposes today, I'd change that a little bit to say, beware of even small distractions. Now, I want to be careful in what I'm about to say, because I absolutely do not want in any way to be seen as equating the two. But think a little bit in terms of addiction. And again, I do not want to equate idolatry and addiction, because they are very different things, and we all know folks who struggle with various kinds of addictions. But oftentimes addictions start very small, don't they? One experience, one incident that over time grows and takes more and more control, if you will. In terms of idolatry, this undue devotion to something, this outplaced perhaps obsession with something, I think it often starts the same way. One experience, one incident that gets its hook into us, and it grows. One of the things that I observed as I was studying this passage a couple of weeks ago was just the connections between Exodus 20, Genesis 3 in the fall, and what Paul says in Romans 1. If we think back for a moment to Adam and Eve, and think what happened there. One little bite of one little piece of very attractive fruit was all it took to upend everything. One seemingly insignificant action changed the whole course of things. I'm convinced that that's how idols often work. They look attractive, they maybe are attractive, they catch our eye, but then they demand more and more until they control us rather than the other way around. Which brings us to the fact that idols also invert things. What's wrong with this picture? What doesn't look right about it? Yeah, the pyramid's upside down, right? I mean, that's not the way a pyramid is supposed to be. A pyramid, at least the ones in Egypt and in South America, Central America, the base is on the ground and it goes up, and this is upside down. It's an upside down pyramid. It's inverted. That's what happened as a result of the fall. Everything got turned upside down. Romans 1, which I mentioned, Paul says that because of that, people do not glorify God. Instead, he says, They exchanged the glory of God for images, idols, made to look like mortal men and birds and animals and reptiles. And then he goes on to say, we have exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator. We worship and serve created things rather than the Creator. And created things could be a pretty broad term if you think about it. I mean, Paul obviously is thinking specifically about physical items there, but in the bigger picture, created things is pretty broad. And it doesn't include just tangible things, but intangible things. Anytime we put something that is a created thing, might be tangible, might be intangible. Anytime we take something that's a created thing, whether we created it or God created it or someone else created it, and put it in a position where it frankly takes more of our attention than God does, we've created an idol. We've created an idol. We have upended, we have helped continue to upend God's perfect order. And it is an ongoing and persistent problem. In some ways, and I think about idols, again, whether it's our little friend with the missing arm or some other idol, it's kind of amazing that we give them the attention that they do, and it's kind of amazing thinking about just the physical idols that anyone actually ever worshiped them in the first place. Think about it, they have no existence apart from human beings. That little statue of Baal was made by someone. Then it would have gone through some elaborate ritual with people getting the god, quote unquote, to enter it. And then it quite possibly, quite likely would have experienced, if you can say a mute idol can experience anything, it would have experienced magical incantations or rituals of some sort directed at it with the expectation that doing that or saying those words was somehow going to get this little deaf and dumb statue to do something. The whole thing is actually rather bizarre. In some ways, you could probably say, if anything, that little statue ought to bow down to the humans rather than the other way around. One scholar put it this way: children dress, feed, and dominate their dolls. Adults dress, feed, and submit to their idols. We take created things and we make them more important than they are. And as a result of that, idols inevitably corrupt things. Now, idolatry per se is not mentioned in Genesis 3, but I would argue it's lurking under the surface. Paul is much more clear in Romans chapter 1. But it's there in Genesis. What did Adam and Eve do? They had clear direction from God, clear word from God. And they ignored it. Instead, what did they do? They deferred to Satan, who was a created being. And they put him ahead of God. They put themselves as created beings, then in the process, above God. They pursued a created object, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the fruit. They pursued that when God had told them not to. And in allowing something else to, in a sense, take the place of God, to interfere with their relationship with God, what did they do? They brought corruption into everything. And in just the immediate result of that, if we read carefully those, we tend to think of it to a great degree in terms of they got kicked out of the garden. But there's a whole lot more there. There's dramatic increase in pain in childbirth. There's a disfiguring of marriage and sexuality. There's increased toil in work. Not just work, but increased toil in it. There's even the loss of harmony in creation itself. Think about it. The first animal was killed because of Adam and Eve's sin. The animosity, if you will, that exists sometimes between us and animals goes back to the fall. One little bite of one little, I'm assuming little piece of fruit corrupted everything. What was it that Rabbi Zacharias said to that student? Beware even small compromises. Why? Because small compromises, small distractions, small diversions always lead to bigger ones. Ironically, pretty much anything or everything that's tainted by this undue devotion given to something, almost all of it that's tainted by that is actually a good thing. If we think back to Genesis, childbirth, not just a good thing, an amazing thing. Absolutely an amazing thing. Marriage and sexuality, good things. Work, a good thing. I know some of us don't think work is good, but work is a good thing. Harmony between humans and the rest of creation, a good thing. And the list could go on. Let's add a few things. Things that sometimes for some of us can take on too much importance if we're honest about it. Think about careers. Good things. Valuable things. Wealth. Wealth is a good thing. I realize some people don't think wealth is a good thing, but God says that wealth is actually a sign of blessing. Wealth is